Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. Today I'm going to answer the question, why do Marvel pros think that they can talk to you in the most nasty way possible, but as soon as you criticize them, you are the nasty, horrible, hate-filled person? Now, that's a question that many people have and ask, and there's a very specific reason for it, and the reason why I wanted to go over it today is because I listened to another Women of Marvel podcast, and this comes up a lot in their podcast. This is, I think, the third one where they talked about the fact that you're not supposed to be negative towards these creators. All right? Not at all. In the last one, which was from the New York Comic Con, they said that specifically as well. Don't put negative comments out there for these creators. Don't do that. And they talk about it here in this one where they're talking about cosplay, and they have these people who are, sort of employed by Marvel in a very small way. And they're talking about you as a creator need to not listen to those hate-filled voices of people who are being negative. All right? Now, first off, I'm going to play you this clip. If you never listened to any of the Women of Marvel podcast, I've never really played clips of them. I'm going to play you this clip just to show you the level of maturity that you get in these podcasts. All right? Because this is something that's been backed by Marvel for 10 years almost now. And they put it up on their website as one of their main things that they promote their brand with. So let me give you the level of professionalism that you get in these podcasts. Just listen to this little clip first.
It's like one of the largest costuming communities in the world. And so you walk around in it and be like, oh, I don't know, I'm not sure. And then everybody be like, that's so good.
Is that how they say it?
Yes. Do you like my voices? I love my voices. Yeah. I mean, and talking about the community, right?
Okay, so that's a level of professionalism that you get in these podcasts. But at the same time, it's run by Sana Amanat, who's number 2 at Marvel, and by this other woman, Judy, who she's actually one of the higher-ups at Marvel, right? So, again, I want to play you another clip. It's about a minute and a half. It's Sana Amanat talking to this cosplayer, and the cosplayer starts first, and then you hear Sana Amanat's reply, and she's talking about how people who are being negative, people who are putting out negative comments, who are criticizing, they're just destructive, whereas these people are being creative. So, you don't actually get to criticize creative people. You're not supposed to do that. All right, so here's the clip for that.
Okay, I just comments. I know that I have 50 great comments and 2 really nasty ones, and you need to not let those 2 comments outweigh all of the good ones, and to really lean on the people that know you are more than just what somebody's judging you for based on a shape, because your shape is beautiful, you are amazing, you're creative and talented, and that person, all they're doing is destroying things. Mm-hmm. So they're not worth your time.
Yeah, we talk a lot about just the concept of destruction versus creation, mm-hmm. and how I think the thesis of the Marvel universe and the context of sort of a lot of what Stan Lee used to talk about in his letters columns was about very much about inclusivity, about focusing on just the positive aspects of the human experience, but really just about bringing people in and sharing sort of the connectedness we have as human beings, but the power we have within ourselves. And it's so important to remind people of that. It has nothing to do with you at the end of the day, mm-hmm. right? But on top of it, I think we also have to kind of remind ourselves that you guys do have this incredible loving community, positive community, and you're celebrating this passion that you have about these fantastic characters. And I think that's really powerful. I think that's so much more important for us to remind one another of that, and just to keep pushing that forward as much as possible.
I mean, one of my favorite things to do at a cons is just go up to a random person mm-hmm. who is in an amazing.
All right, so the reason why I wanted to talk about this is because when Sana Amanat talks, she uses very specific language. Now, I can recognize this because, honestly, we have a very similar, I would say, educational background. And she's using political theory language. That's what she's doing. It sticks out like a sore thumb to me. And that's the kind of language that she uses to express these ideas and talk about these things. All right? She's twisting Stan Lee's words, first of all around in a pretzel to make it look like he was a socialist, Marxist kind of person, and just backing all the things that she wants to back, by the way. But this is the kind of ideas that she's putting out there. And I do call her socialist, communist-minded kind of person. And I say that partly because of the language that she's using. That's exactly where this language comes from. Again, I've studied these things just like she has, and that's where they come from. But also you have, other higher ups at Marvel, like that funny little man with a mustache saying, "I'm a socialist and I hate capitalism," coming out and saying it on his Twitter. Straight up. All right. So in order to understand these ideas, I have to go pretty far back into some little bit of things that I've gone into before, and it's into her language. It's because she redefines everything according to her socialist communist kind of mindset. And that's why when you listen to these kinds of quotes, you say, that makes no sense. You're ridiculous, lady. I mean, you got pros out there just attacking people left, right, and center, and yet you don't want people to be negative towards your creators? What are you talking about? Why is there this double standard? Well, to them, they don't think there's a double standard because they have redefined all of these words that they use, specifically like creativity and destruction, and they redefine it according to a socialist communist kind of mindset. So again, hopefully I won't bore you with this, but try to get into the meat of why she's speaking this way. And it comes from the socialist communist mindset that she has. And by the way, socialism is just supposed to be the step before communism. If you look at all of the early communist documents and them setting it up as a movement, they use the two words interchangeably, socialism and communism. So these kinds of people, what they say is that the end of history is communism. That's the end of history. That's where history will eventually take us. And eventually is the key word there, because that's where it will end up. There is no question in their minds, according to their ideology. That's where history will take us, into a socialist, communist utopia. And that's the end of history. So at the same time, what happens is, because they believe this, if you're working towards this socialist communist utopia, well, then you're on the right side of history, because that's the way history is going. Whereas if you support the old institutions, things like, capitalism or constitutional republics or even religion or anything like that, you're supporting the old kind of world, and that's working against where history is going, and therefore you're on the wrong side of history. So what they do is they're saying that, since this is inevitable, we're just trying to bring it about faster. That's what their movement is all about. They want to bring this communist socialist utopia to fruition before it will naturally come. And the thing is that because it naturally is going to come, there is something holding it back from coming right now. And what's the thing holding it back right now? Well, that's the institutions that are in existence in the world right now. Like capitalism and all those other hateful institutions that they're always talking about, like the family or misogyny or all those other kinds of things. So, of course, this is what they're working against. And they need to get rid of those old institutions so that their socialist utopia can come into existence. And how do you get rid of them? They won't go silently into the night. The way that you get rid of them is you have to destroy them, because your socialist communist utopia can't exist unless those old institutions are destroyed. And they need to be destroyed. And it can be destroyed in a number of ways. But originally they thought it was just going to be a revolution, a violent revolution, and that was going to destroy them all. And it didn't happen that way. In the 40s, they thought that their revolution was just going to catch all over the world, and it was going to be the socialist communist utopia was just going to be there eventually, really quickly. But they learned by the 60s that, that idea kind of stalled, that the revolution kind of stalled. So they came up with these other ideas of how to promote their revolution. So they got a bunch of intellectuals together in, where did they go? It was in Frankfurt in Germany. All right. And they come up with this idea of critical theory. All right. Now, critical theory, I talked about this before. It's very close in its name to critical thinking, but I think that's deceptively made that way so that you confuse the two, but they're very much opposed. Critical thinking is the old way of thinking about things. It's the logical way of thinking about things. That is to say, what critical thinking is, it's a part of logic. And it says that, the truth is out there, and you use logic to find it. And once you find it, it's like this precious gem, all right, that you dig out of the earth. But since you dig it out of the earth, it's covered in dirt, and a whole bunch of other kinds of rocks are stuck to it, and it's unformed. And what you do is you criticize it. You take this truth and you apply criticism to it to get rid of that dirt, to get rid of those things that are clinging to it, to get rid of all those imperfections, to shine it up and form it into a high sheen. So you use criticism to get rid of everything that's false, and you make the truth beautiful. That's what you do with critical thinking. But these people, they come up with critical theory. Now, critical theory is the idea that criticism is only a weapon. Now, for critical thinking, criticism is a tool. You can have constructive criticism, but for these communist, socialist-minded people who come up with critical theory, criticism is only a weapon, and is used for destruction. And you can see why they might think this, because, of course, when you actually use critical thinking and apply it to their ideological way of doing things, it falls apart. You take logic and apply it to communist socialist ideas, and your communist socialist ideas just fall apart, right? So they see that criticism is nothing but an attack. It's nothing but a weapon to use to attack, and that you should use it to criticize these institutions like capitalism over and over and over again in as many ways possible, on as many fronts possible, and as quickly as possible until it falls apart. And it's used to destroy these old institutions. So you criticize something until it is destroyed. So that's what critical theory is. So you go back to Sana Amanat's words, right? This is why she's talking about creation and destruction. She says we talk a lot about the concepts of destruction versus creation. Now, I'm not sure who we is, but I'll take her at her word and say that they do actually talk about these things a lot. I would say, sure, they do talk about these things a lot. But here's the point. So if you have these people online, these comic pros, and they're on the right side of history because they're working towards putting out their representation for body positivity and all of these identity politics kinds of things. So they're working towards that end of their socialist communist utopia. Therefore, they're on the right side of history. Therefore, if you criticize them, now remember, they only see criticism as a weapon to attack with. If you criticize them, even if it's lightly enough just to say, listen, I can see where you're coming from. However, I think we should consider other possibilities being true as well. And I've seen people just be polite and say that to these comic pros. And what's the next thing that the comic pro does? Goes straight on the attack. Just nasty attack at these people who are being very polite. Why? Because, of course, that's a criticism. And a criticism in their minds is only an attack. There's no such thing as constructive criticism. It's only destructive. Therefore, you have attacked them. Therefore, they attack back harder. That's what they do, right? And they are allowed to attack you back, and they are allowed to criticize you as well, but they're allowed to attack back because you are on the wrong side of history. All right? Since you are criticizing them and they're on the right side of history, therefore you are trying to support these old hate-filled institutions, and therefore you deserved to be attacked. All right? And at the same time, they can criticize other kinds of comics like Ethan Van Sciver's and Richard Meyer's stuff. They can criticize those things all they want because, of course, their criticism is meant to destroy the people that are on the wrong side of history. That's exactly what they are doing. So since they are on the right side of history, they can use criticism as a weapon to destroy these things. And it's perfectly fine in their minds. But at the moment you use criticism against them, well, that's an attack on them who are on the right side of history, and you can't do that. Now, this is why this is happening. Now, you can see it even in these words that I played for you from this clip, right? Because these people, they're saying you can't criticize these creators, but at the same time, they're being extremely critical of the people who are speaking to them. They're saying these people aren't worth your time. Now, if that's not a criticism, I don't know what is. That's a negative criticism. I would say some people's ideas are not worth your time, but they're saying these people are not worth your time. So that's what they think about our criticisms. They mean nothing to them because, of course, we're on the wrong side of history, because they're on the right side of history, and therefore we cannot criticize them. So they block them out. They literally talk in these podcasts about, yes, you got to block them. You got to make sure that you never actually hear any of these criticisms. Never even allow them into the conversation at all. And at the same time, they're perfectly fine being able to criticize others. So this is where their ideas come from. This is why they think that they can be mean and nasty, critical people online and not allow anybody else to criticize them. Because, of course, this is their mindset. That criticism is only a weapon, and if you use that weapon against them who are on the right side of history, you are a hate-filled person. Anyway, I wanted to talk about this because this pops up again and again and again in these podcasts, especially with Sana Amanat, and she uses this language a lot. So I wanted to go over it. And if I give you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a message. Tell me what you think about this. All right. I'll see you later. Bye.